But they've visited a provider, they've been certified for access to medicine and just need to register with the program. Again, worth monitoring on a regular basis, the volume of caregivers, because I think it's something that we want to be sensitive to. It's something we always want to make sure that there's access, that patients have access to caregivers, but caregivers have access to market as well. So, and then again, you see the provider count here not moving significantly at all. I know we've had many conversations about that in previous months. It'll be a central focus too of the regulatory process.
One quick question, and this is also part of the sort of, the regulatory writing process. We are primarily focused right now on what the legislature told us we have to do. This is one of the things that has, as you know, has resonated with me with the nurse practitioners.
Yes.
The fact that our regulations do not jive with the range of authority that nurse practitioners have been given by statute. Is there any way that is something that could be done in parallel with what we're doing right now? Because it feels like that's one of those things where you could almost get testimony. We don't have to have a hearing on something like that. I'd want to just raise that because I feel like that's one of those things. If we are worried about access, I'm thinking of like places down the Cape and other things, out in Western Mass, but we can talk, you and I can talk about this offline, but it feels like this is one of those like little tweaks that, if there are some things like that we're looking at, especially as it pertains to access, because making people wait as we go through this process, and it feels like that's something that could be more simple. And again, I don't want to minimize what the staff work would be, but if there's a way to do something.
Yeah. And you're fair to raise that question. It's not pushback or resistance by any means. It's more how do you organize it? How do you sequence it? How often are you publishing regulations for public comment, and trying not to cause any significant confusion. Or one of the things I struggle with, and it's a pet peeve more than anything else, is versioning and version control of which version are we editing today. So I don't want to give the public or operators in particular, and it's twofold. One is for operators, we expect them to comply. So we want to make sure that they're aware of any regulatory change, and that includes providers, of course, but also our staff. We want to make sure our staff have concrete, clear messaging when they're in the field of, well, did you know this regulation changed? Well, when? And so that's really on some of we have a laundry list of things we'd like to update. Some of that, I'm not going to pretend for a second that I'm going to be the keeper of that draft. Instead, it's going to be the 5 commissioners, but it's really, and when I say that, it's really for what is the ministerial edit, what is the minor tweak. What might be minor to me may not be minor to one of you. So my objective would be to present you with a lot of those. We talked about telehealth in this example. I don't know if you want to make that permanent or not, but the drafting of that is very simple. So there's a whole host of things that I think were simple drafting. The MP is another example. For me, it's just a matter of sequencing and how you organize it.
I think it's important, in this conversation to sort of let folks know that we're actually doing all of this. We just have to focus on that stuff first.
Yeah.
And I know that, we've gotten some letters from some nurse practitioners saying, I don't have to report to a doctor, and why, so, but just, I guess, reassuring folks that this is in the pipeline.
Yeah.
It's going to be happening. It's just, by the nature of the deadlines that have been put in place with Chapter 180, we have things that have to go to the
That's right.
And just for access, we talk about those 428 providers, and sometimes if someone doesn't have access to internet, how do they find those providers necessarily? And I was just wondering if this commission could entertain at some point. And I know you had this said a reason why we don't list the providers on our website, but we do list, like if I put in my zip code, I can find an MTC, and I put the mile radius on I can find an MTC, and I can't find a provider. And you said part of that was because of the federal illegalities, and they didn't, you didn't put it on the website. If there was an opt-in measure where physicians could opt in, could we entertain that just so someone could find providers easily?
By state law, our database is required to be confidential. So we could not, even in an opt-in, we could not publish that. Correct.
Physicians have to remain confidential by state
law.
So that would be a statute.
We would not be legally able to publish that information. So we've talked a lot about that.
I appreciate
it. Really came up in the context, just for clarity's sake, around finding pediatric doctors.
Yeah.
And if folks have identified as a subspecialty, or if they were pediatricians, could we publish that information? That was the analysis done at that time.
But-
Was state law requires that that database remain confidential.
But this might also be a conversation because it's my understanding that on federal law, some of the conversations that physicians can have with their patients has now been relaxed when it pertains to cannabis, correct? I mean, was there?
Conversations, yes.
Yeah, so I'm also wondering, it's, even in the conversation that we had with the Mass Municipal Association, we had actually stated at a meeting that that whatever host community agreement you have negotiated sort of is in place until, we come up with new regs. And they didn't necessarily hear it. We had a conversation and then we clarified that with them. I'm just wondering if at some point in time with the Mass, Medical Association, that we have a conversation and maybe engage some of the people in the leadership to message that, because that may not be at the front of their, to-do list when physicians gather, but it might be something to see if we can engage them. So
Yeah.
I may take that on myself.
I think I might have message what?
Message that the federal law has changed about the ability to have conversations about cannabis. Part of the issue is, as I understand it, and maybe I'm not stating it right,
I
is
just want to make sure I'm understanding, because Commissioner Roy brought up having a database and being able to access that. And I just want to make sure. I'm
And John
understanding
said we
how this
couldn't
all
do it
together.
because
Right.
it's in state law.
Right.
but what I'm reflecting upon is the conversation we had, I think, at our last meeting, where we were talking about telemedicine.
Right.
And I said, with all due respect, I don't think that form of telemedicine is necessarily, that's not my
I remember this
gatekeeper.
conversation.
And so it's, I want to be able to have those conversations with my primary care physician. But if my primary care physician is not necessarily well-versed in what the current status of the law that allows them to do that, they can then make those decisions themselves. We're not telling them what to do. They're probably not even going to be in our database, but I think it's really just making sure that they're educated about what they can do when it comes to some of this stuff, and maybe they take it upon themselves to become more educated. So
Talking more about the educational.
right, exactly. Yeah.
And along those lines, I suppose too, there may be opportunities for trade groups to maintain their own lists of, and I think what would be helpful is, this is a scenario, I don't know how common or possible it is. I guess I can see the viability or feasibility is, I may be seeing a provider for any number of ailments, issues, et cetera. Let's say I'm seeing an oncologist for cancer treatment. They are not a prescriber or a certifying physician in our system, but they'd like to recommend that, folks with appetite or sleep or something, anxiety, have found benefits, medical benefits, or therapeutic benefits to cannabis. I can't certify you, but if I go to my trade group, I can find who might be in a position to. And I think we may not be able to publish that list again pursuant to Mass General Law, but there's nothing prohibiting the Mass Medical Society or Physicians Assistants Association from maintaining such a list. Because again, it's our database that we're not allowed to publish. And there's a number of reasons why that would be a public policy choice that the legislature made. Certainly one is the fact that a lot of providers do maintain DEA registrations for writing prescriptions. And not to mention, we know the challenges with banking in this industry. And if we were to publish a list that said, here's all the folks that are generating revenue from cannabis, there might be risks associated with that. So there might be any number of reasons why that privacy is important. I don't want to telegraph, and we don't publish things like legislative intent, so I don't want to assign anything there, but I could see some public policy choices. Again, I'm not saying it's long-term, it's something I would agree with, but that's not my place.
And there could be a disruptor, may I add? So we got the bills that were filed,
Sure.
and there's two that would require insurers to reimburse for medical cannabis. That's a major game changer or disruptor in the cannabis market. If a health insurance provider would reimburse for medical cannabis. So then then the conversation would evolve from there. If we have,
Would say so. without
Yeah.
doubt. Yep. And also, we've talked about this briefly as well. In certifying physicians, providers, and NPs, PAs, whoever it may be, to access our program, we're not governing their practice of medicine. That is still governed by the boards of registration in medicine, nursing, et cetera. We're essentially allowing them access to our program. And one of the conditions of them having access to our program is that they maintain their status as licensed providers, but we don't license them ourselves. We don't govern their scope of practice or their standards of practice.
Thank you.
I know I promised I'd be efficient about this. I'm sorry.
No, this is why we need to have a separate meeting to have this kinds of
We have lots of
conversations.
questions.
So that
You
people
do.
who are waiting out there with bated breath to find out what happens to them, they can go on their lives. and-
So that's the data. So I can move on to some other things. A couple programmatic or agency updates for you. First and importantly, Governor Healy released her first budget not too long ago. So it's House One is the governor's budget. So that really formally kicks off the budget season on Beacon Hill, especially. So as you may remember, we requested for FY24 a grand total of $23.7 million. That included 18.5 million for our main operating account, 1.5 million for the public awareness campaign, and 3.6 million for the medical use of marijuana program. The governor's budget, House One, provided us $19.7 million. So a shortcoming that we're obviously hopeful we can overcome and move as we move through the legislative process, but it is a reduction. There's a number of figures we are tagging that against. So obviously wanted to call your attention to that. Versus fiscal 23, which is our current fiscal year, which is 19.2 million available to us. It is an increase. It's an increase of about $545,000. Versus what we described as our maintenance budget, which we would say is a level service. That's if we were to annualize all of the hiring we're doing this year, plus carrying forward any contracts that we were to enter into throughout this fiscal year, that would represent a decrease of $575,000. And again, so that's a swing. Obviously, we're mindful of that. Versus our fiscal 24 request, it's about a $3.9 million.
And were we to get everything we asked for,
Sure.
how much are we still under, in terms of how we sort of pay for ourselves, in terms of the revenues that we, that we take in? How close to that?
Sure. I would,
revenue neutral?
yeah, that's a great question. I would say conservatively, non-tax revenue would be about 28 to $30 million. So that's just fees, et cetera. That is not a dime of tax revenue. So we're still significantly under that as far as the cost neutrality of our program.
And what is the figure of revenues to the state based on everything that we collect from the cannabis industry?
So we would do all non-tax revenue would be about the 28 to $30 million, and then 20% of sales. Now, granted, 3% of that goes to cities and towns. The 10 3/4 is the excise tax and 6 1/4 sales tax. If you figure we're doing, again, conservatively about $1.3 billion, you're looking at several $100 million.
Right, so this is the argument.
Without a doubt, absolutely. And I think to be clear too, our growth, our expectations for growth are really around critical functions that require us to scale alongside this industry. For context, I mentioned there's 100 MTCs. When we took over the medical use of marijuana program, it was 49 MTCs.
Yeah.
We have 500 entities that have commenced their operations in Massachusetts today, plus several hundred more that are in the licensing queue. The licensing queue requires any combination of inspections as well as the document reviews. That does not include anything relative to changes of ownership, changes of location. And those changes of ownership range from adding a board member to an entire acquisition and merger. You're also starting to see, there was a $2 billion merger acquisition proposed from two multi-state entities that is now being delayed. What does that mean? Some of these things are wildly complex. We benefit. We're obviously grateful to have the support of some vendors that we use for training and technical review and some forensic assistance. At the same time, it's largely our staff that are driving those evaluations. So, and we don't know what to expect as far as that. But obviously, if you start to see some distressed assets in this space, and you do, you're going to see more changes of ownership. And those changes of ownership happen with, I can only imagine what your inboxes look like as far as the urgency associated with that, which is, I'm in trouble. I need this acquisition to go through. Am I on the next meeting agenda? Am I on the next meeting agenda? So we want to be able to not necessarily meet that urgency, but we want to serve people in a predictable timeline. In order to do that, it requires resources. So just for context, so a few items here I want to just call your attention to. For fiscal 24, we were looking to add about 26 FTEs. We would not be in a position to do that if the governor's number were to survive. We're also planning on doing a number of IT upgrades, primarily around IT security, cybersecurity, et cetera. To be clear, at no point will I, in my capacity, allow us to become vulnerable from an IT standpoint. It would require shifting resources, though. But I'm not saying I would lob off IT upgrades. We're also hoping to do a racial disparity study to look at this industry, primarily to support a number of activities. One is knowing that exclusivity for delivery and social consumption is a 3-year, 36-month calendar window. You want to be in a position to evaluate the efficacy of that. One way to do that is through the racial disparity study. Again, it would require us as an agency to think critically about what are the priorities and how do we meet those priorities. So
Sean, how far are we into that that exclusivity period window?
began April 1st of this year, I'm sorry, 2022. So we're about a year in. And so we would want to be in a position to evaluate that. And again, the only thing I'll say is this is the opening gun. This is by no means, we're not at the finish line. And you see here the bottom couple bullets. We have work to do. We've historically done that work. We are grateful for the support we've historically received, including from the administration, to be clear. You know, Governor Baker's office. This is not uncommon. Obviously, the governor proposes as part of their budget their priorities, and the legislature now gets their opportunity. We will testify before Ways and Means in March. The House budget comes out usually the week before April vacation. They usually debate that budget the week after April vacation. The Senate budget comes out in May, and then the conference committee meets in throughout June, aspiring for July 1st budget to be signed and executed by the administration. So again,
Aspiration.
I said aspiring, knowing that the legislature, they get it right. They take as much time as they need to get it right. And when I say get it right, I also mean that they've generally supported us in that exercise, and we're grateful for it. We have work to do, and we'll do that work.
Sean, just if I can,
Please,
Madam Chair, just internally, again, because we never get to talk to each other at the same time. But I know that we are coordinating internally for all of us commissioners and the chair and myself as a treasurer to sort of be in concert with these conversations for the State House. So I'm sure everyone's going to participate, but thank you for starting to move that stuff along. I think you and I had a conversation, and then you and the chair had a conversation, and then the chair and I weren't, didn't have the conversation. Now we're all on the same page. So thank you for moving that forward.
Sorry, Mr. Roy?
So, back to the excise tax and the sales tax, the 6 1/4 and the 10 3/4%, which goes into the general fund,
6 1/4.
marijuana regulation fund, correct?
6 1/4 would go into the general fund. The 10 3/4 goes into the marijuana regulation fund.
Okay. Do we ultimately know where the money gets appropriated so we can see the good that is being done in the Commonwealth with that money? And there's a way to have a slide that we could share with the public where those funds are being spent and the impact we're having.
Yes and no. We can. We need to go through. So the legislature ultimately dictates where that money goes, and so selfishly, we'd like to see some of it come here. We'd like to see our portion returned to us, whatever that may be, whatever our request may be. We'd like to be supported. And then otherwise, what the legislature does as part of again, through the administration as well, is they, in some areas, some accounts, they identify the source of funding. And so if the source of funding is the marijuana regulation fund, we could extract that information. So
I'm glad you asked that, Commissioner Roy, because I feel like
We don't really know where.
everyone always asks. I have the printout at my house on my wall, and I have where does the money go? So thank you for asking, because I think we haven't had the opportunity to have that conversation, and everyone's, it goes back to the State House. It's somewhere locked in a room up there, but thank you. It's a big question.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I don't know if that's something our government affairs team could put a slide together for us in the future to see where that marijuana regulation fund goes and the good it does.
yes, I'm happy to take on the task. I will figure out where the task resides as far as the task itself, but
That's a big ask too, Sean.
It
Yeah,
is a
it
big
is.
ask in the future.
Don't feel like you gotta say, I mean, you're saying yes, and you're probably thinking the government affairs team is gonna kill me. And so
Yeah,
as a side
starting
house,
that
folks,
international.
like, that's a big ask. I think every one of you guys see the articles that came out last year
Yep.
just around this. There's a whole series around this, right? So that's a big
the other
question that we're asking, so.
point I want to convey, and I'd want to make sure we include this as a caveat, we don't dictate where the money goes.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to own that as an agency, that we're deciding where this pie gets,
Yeah.
how the pie gets sliced. That's not what, I didn't realize that's not what you're saying.
Sunshine to it.
I don't want to create that impression either.
Right.
This also might be a good opportunity, again, because we're all together, we're speaking together openly, because there's something that I am developing with our government affairs team to develop something, a presentation on the state of cannabis
Right.
at the State House. And that would be something that would be included within that material as well.
Okay.
So it is aligned with that. I don't think that I've disclosed that to the entire group as a whole. I think Commissioner Camargo, I mentioned that that was something I was thinking about in the last year or so, but
Yeah.
that falls in line with sort of that conversation will be.
So are you talking about what the positive impact is? Is that what you're looking at? What do you, just want to get clarity. What are you working on with the government affairs team?
The state of cannabis. So it will be an annual presentation and conversation at the State House.
But the state of the industry or the state of the impact or both?
Both.
Okay, good.
Hmm. Like a day at the State House.
Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll bring some sunshine to the State House.
There you go. And then that way you can package that and still use that, utilize the information too.
Good idea.
That's great.
So that's the budget. Again, I'll provide updates as we have them, but also grateful for your continued collaboration as far as what that strategy looks like for outreach and ensuring that folks understand the work that we do here and what it takes to complete that. A couple other updates. I mentioned last month that MDAR and the commission were going to sort of co-host or co-sponsor a number of webinars. Those did occur. In fact, they occurred this week, March 7th and March 8th. So was that Tuesday and Wednesday of this week? The first one was Pesticide Basics 101, and the second was an introduction, to worker protection standards. And so my understanding, they were pretty well attended. MDAR received a lot of questions from licensees around is there availability of a list to be published of what is approved versus what's not approved. I think the common reaction from MDAR is we'll take that under advisement and see if we can put something together. Obviously, the list of what's not approved is much, much longer than what could be approved, but also bearing in mind too that their policy requires it to be approved for both hemp and tobacco, and then obviously the lesser of both application levels or thresholds. So and
Will they be doing this again? I'd actually wanted to join one of them and I fell off my radar screen, but will they be doing more of these?
we can follow up and see if there's a need to either do more that folks could not attend or if there's a need to continue conversations in some.
Well, I'm just wondering if they recorded it, if it's,
Find out.
yeah, but I think it'd be good. I mean, this would be something if they did record it, or if they do something in the future, that any recording either is on their website or there's a link
That's right.
from our website to their website, because I think that could save us a lot of, extra phone calls.
And it was valuable too for our staff.
Yeah.
Obviously, because we get a lot of those questions too.
So may I ask a question as my role as secretary?
Please.
If this isn't recorded anywhere and there's not a link, could we request commissioners reach out to MDAR for a training for us as regulators, whether it's an abbreviated training or just, I think it was a 2-hour training, but
Right.
as my role as secretary, I just want to make sure that's something that my fellow commissioners would be open to. And obviously if there's already a link, then that question is moot. But if there isn't, maybe we could have a training. It's important. We get a lot of questions around pesticides. And I'm always eager to learn more.
But I think it would be smart if it's not recorded, that this be repeated, because my sense is that the word is still getting out for a lot of people. And they may not necessarily, I don't know what the universe was that they publicized this to. Did we publicize that in concert with them?
We did.
Mhm.
We sent it to all of our licensees and I just got a note. That's why
On social media,
It was on social media.
but any sort of. direct-
bulletin through Metric as well.
Okay, fine, okay.
Yeah, and for those listening, it was a difficult week for us, not only meeting week, but we are in regulation working groups, so we just couldn't attend. It wasn't for lack of wanting, it just didn't work.
Okay.
It was recorded.
Oh, it was, excellent, okay, great.
Sorry, I realized that was rude to pull my phone up, but
No.
it was, we have to get information, so.
So now we have it.
And it
Thank
will
you,
be available. We'll
Thank
make sure it's available.
thank you.
Thank you.
Also on this note too, just wanted to, and there's no slide or text. The Governor Healy appointed a new commissioner of MDAR. So Ashley Randall, who was a deputy commissioner at the department for some time under former Commissioner LeBeau. So I want to obviously offer her our congratulations, my personal congratulations. We did have an opportunity throughout my tenure here, our tenure, to work with her. So she is immensely qualified, immensely talented. And so I don't expect any change as far as our relationship or dynamic with MDAR. And obviously just want to extend my personal thanks and gratitude to Commissioner LeBeau, who for the entirety of our tenure here at this agency was a valuable partner. always lent a valuable ear, was an active member of the Cannabis Advisory Board in his ex officio capacity. And again, just someone it was a joy to work with, and want to wish him well and thank him again for his service. And again, looking forward to continuing that relationship with Ashley as well in her new capacity. So, excuse me, Commissioner Randall, in her new capacity. So congratulations to her.
Thank you.
Next update, and I promised I'd motor through them. Regulations. So at this one, I don't need to spend a ton of time on. Commissioners kind of alluded to it. Those working groups are underway. Commissioner Concepcion, thank you for your acknowledgement. I just want to not take credit for it, but instead extend it to our legal team and Mercedes Erickson, who've done really yeoman's work with pulling this all together, really brainstorming what it looks like. But also that process too came together through the feedback of our staff and commissioners as far as what do you want in an exercise or a process, and how can we make sure that we can facilitate that meaningful engagement with our staff who are developing an expertise, who themselves are indeed experts. But also I know that there is a desire to learn from others, including stakeholders. And so the point I really want to indicate here for you is that stakeholder feedback is something I'm keenly aware of and mindful of, your desire to get it throughout this process, not just once a draft is available, but instead get it as early as possible. And then lastly, and Madam Chair, you referenced it, but agreeing with you that there may be a need for special or dedicated meetings to vet policy proposals, to really dig into some things and have conversations. What I'll say to the public is there's something very refreshing about a group of commissioners that are willing to brainstorm in public. There's a bit of vulnerability to that of, do I dare throw this idea out there? So one is I guess, be patient with us as we go through this exercise, realizing that patience is something it's not easy to request. It's certainly sometimes even harder to grant. At the same time, I respect the fact that you can't speak with one another in any robust way outside of inviting the public. But it's how good policy gets made. It's iterative. It's something that is negotiated. So that willingness to do that is something we want to make sure you have sufficient space for.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Executive Director, and appreciate you putting that slide up. But I think we've all been echoing the same message of getting input long before it's required as part of the regulatory process. Is something our group talked about the other day. We were talking strategies, Madam Chair, to your goal and outreach to MMA, because their stakeholders are so connected to the work we're going to do. We talked about specifically reaching out to the license types that would be impacted by social consumption. The other thought we had is that there's a tool available right now. Anybody can weigh into the commission on anything. We certainly extend that invite today from our working group that if you're an interested stakeholder, one of our public sector counterparts, somebody in the industry, you want to weigh in your thoughts and concerns on social consumption, the email is commission@cccmass.com. Just put in the title line, social consumption, so it will help staff get it to the right working group. But we open that up and certainly invite folks to start weighing in now. Again, it's going to be one of several strategies that we're going to use, but it's certainly something that's available right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Simmons.
I just want to add a comment. Chairwoman, thank you for making the comment about having additional public conversations, because as the lone commissioner on two working groups, municipal equity and HCA, but those topics in particular, there's a lot of overlap. I know we all overlap with a lot of different things.
Lawyer.
There's a lot that I know I'm already gaining because I'm in both rooms, but I think that as a collective, we'll get a lot from those conversations just to understand where we're going, the direction.
There's also more pressure on you because you have 2 ears and 2 conversations,
That's
and
true.
you have to be careful.
And even when I referenced something earlier today, I said, well, was this in the municipal equity conversation? Was that the HCA? It might have been the HCA. But anyways, I say all that to say that I welcome opportunities for more open dialogue.
Thank you. We all agree on that. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
I promise I'm getting close. I promise. So the next slide, and again, we've touched on some of this, highlighting that NECAN in Boston is this weekend. So obviously, some of our staff will be there. Obviously, commissions will be there. I may show up.
The keynote.
I may be there. So just a heads up, wanted, that's great. Looking forward to that. We will post that meeting agenda. Yes, please scatter yourselves amongst the audience. The next item is that I just wanted to touch on the governance project quickly, just to clarify and identify. One is obviously it's ongoing, so I don't want to touch too much on it. The way, and obviously the format that it's occurring in, I don't want to reveal a ton until it's appropriate. At the same time, want to just remind the public, especially, as to what that is and why we're doing it, which is obviously creating a durable governance document for us as an agency. It isn't often, we're a 5-year-old agency. It isn't often that you get to imagine it up, build government from literally nothing. And in that, there's going to be any number of challenges, questions, and determinations that need to get made. So if you think of any government entity, including cities, towns, school committees, et cetera, they're governed by a charter which dictates and delineates authority appropriately. And so one of the things that those communities or entities will do is they will build a governance charter. Sometimes they create special committees that go off for well over a year and years to do that from scratch. And then they continuously revise those things and update those things based on this is working, this is not. So wanted to just compliment, and obviously it sounds awkward to compliment ourselves, and I'm generally uncomfortable doing that. At the same time, I think it is very well intentioned. And I want to just clear up for anyone that might be watching or listening to our meetings that it is not a matter of discontent or disagreement. It really is an exercise in how do we, as commissioners, vis-a-vis myself in an administrative role versus our staff, how do we delineate that authority? And really, it's a good exercise. It's a healthy exercise. It's almost hygienic in a way to make sure that our agency is durable and lives beyond all of us. But if you were starting a city or town from nothing, you would start with what is the role of the mayor? What is the role of the city council? What is the role of the departments of that community? That's essentially the equivalent of what that exercise is. So I've gotten enough questions about it that I thought it was important to clarify.
And if I can defend the process a little bit, not defend the process, but this was in 4 months before I
That's correct.
was appointed. And so this has been a little bit delayed because of my newness, my understanding my own role, and sort of being a part of that. So I know that people are, again, it's not going to change the world. It's just going to create some clarity, for us. But I will say that part of the iterative process of developing and kind of pushing back and determining what this document is going to be like, it's been an absolute tremendous learning opportunity for me, as a new commissioner, a new chair. While it has taken longer, I think, than people, would like, I think that the additional time has been, I think, appropriate to help me get onboarded, but also I think that it has fostered, I think, a greater level of communication and collaboration among the commissioners, which I think is a really healthy outcome.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Chair, don't blame yourself too much because we also had to figure out the right vendor, right? And this was way before even some of us got here. This is something that I think the former commissioners were trying to do and didn't have the time to do anything else. And I think this has been a great process because these are different. I say this all the time, whether I sound like a broken record, I don't care. These are difficult roles to be in. Period, end of story. You get appointed, you come to the commission, you get an onboarding process and you're out the gate. This stuff has been running really fast. So
Yeah.
I think it's been a good time for us to sit there, have hard conversations amongst each other, push back on each other, understand how do we run the commission? How do we lead? How do we create a culture that will stay here for the next 5 to 10 years, right? After we're gone. So I just want to say that because I don't want you to kick yourself too much because, we had to find the right vendor and organize this correctly so that we can have these conversations to allow us to lead internally. So
that was
Thank you.
exactly the thoughts I was going to add. It's like the process began, I believe, in 2021 for,
Sure, formally. Yeah.
formally, but the thought and the creation of sort of this pathway that we went down was before any of us were here as commissioners.
Right.
But I also remember when we talked about this and introduced it at the beginning, when we were going into mediation and governance, this is something that I spoke in detail with the former chairman about as well. This is something that we want to do sort of on a regular basis.
Sure.
We had hit the 5-year mark, and the hope is that in the next 5 years, you revisit and see where we are and assess if this charter is all that we need as this agency. And to Commissioner Camargo, to your point, not only is it as commissioners, but being commissioners, so what Sean mentioned, of a completely new agency. It's
Yeah.
a learning process. I think that we've, not just us, the commissioners before us, our executive director have done a lot in a really short span of time. So I am really happy that we're at this mark and at this point where we're having this conversation and reaching a conclusion to it as well.
I mean, I gotta add too, not to forget, when we started the governance process was kind of, when we started the governance process, it was almost the first time that we got to be together in public.
It was.
Right? So we've been working off, off of Teams, and it was nice to just be in person and understand each other and, so,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Sean.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
And one area too, just to build off, and then I promise I'll move on, is I think where we may often get hung up or trip up is the description of mediation. That can kind of lead people to conclude something, that you typically put it in a context, and that's unfortunate. Really, it's a vehicle. Mediation's a vehicle. It's kind of little m mediation. At the same time too, if you gave any agency or any bureaucracy, never mind agency, city or town, whatever it may be, you gave them a charge to begin with and said, create yourself, they would probably start with roles, responsibilities.
Yeah.
We started with, so when are stores going to be open? And so we quickly ran into, all right, running start, and we did that work. And I think the benefit we reached was we now have a system or an awareness of one another. And so we're bringing that information into our process to learn from one another. So I can quickly run through as I see Commissioner Camargo's taking a break. I will, these two updates, the last two updates for you are non-controversial, non-substantive. I mentioned the legislature getting underway. Just wanted to congratulate and acknowledge that Senator Adam Gomez from Western Massachusetts is the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Cannabis Policy, and Representative Daniel Donahue of Worcester is the House Chair, returning as the House Chair of the committee. Looking forward to working with both of those gentlemen in their capacities as chair. And then lastly is our hiring update, which is an evergreen slide. What I want to just call your attention to is activity here. There's a ton of activity around this agency. We've recently onboarded a legal assistant as well as an additional desktop support analyst in our IT team, which I know commissioners take full advantage of, as well as our staff. We are also identifying final candidates for office manager, legal assistant, press secretary, and 2 laboratory and testing analysts as we build out the ranks on our laboratory and testing side. And then you see the myriad of positions that we have either posted or in the interview screening phase. Project coordinators across the agency, director of IT security, policy analyst, associate enforcement counsel, deputy general counsel, investigators, plural. Looking to bring in a number of them: constituent service associate, human resources generalist, research analyst, enforcement paralegal, and receptionist. A new approach that we're going to take as well is that our positions are going to be posted not so much with deadlines necessarily, but instead until we can fill them, to make sure that we have an absolute opportunity to find the best and most qualified folks. And obviously, if we're unable to do that, we will continue to go back to that pool. Want to just call your attention lastly to an item that's not on the slide, but I'm also intending to post the role of chief people officer in a matter of days. So obviously want folks to pay attention to that, be on the lookout for it, as that is going to join the ranks of direct reports to me. And obviously such a critical role at this agency for any number of things. One is to help with the hiring activity that you see before you, but also ensuring that as we go into the next 5 years of this agency, we're doing so with a thought leader, a strategic advisor, and someone that joins the ranks of our senior leadership. So it's not here, but I want to obviously, I will broadcast it on all of our social media, my own, and just cast that message as wide as possible. So, and Commissioner Camargo, thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. I know, I think we all do. So, Commissioner Camargo, I will entertain a motion to adjourn for, well, I want to do 15 minutes because I know if you'd like to order something, so it'll take, 15, minutes. So what will that be? Like 5 minutes of 12:05? 5 minutes of 12?
5 minutes of 12.
5 minutes of 12, ballpark. So entertain a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Take a call roll. Commissioner Camargo.
Aye.
Commissioner Concepcion.
Aye.
Commissioner Roy.
Aye.
Commissioner Stebbins.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We will reconvene in 15 minutes. Sorry about that.